Many projects have gone awry or astray because of the wrong contract or no contract. And so I'm going to take you through my production contract, the one that I use successfully in my business. And I'm going to walk you through it. It's not going to be anything fancy, just me talking through the contract and showing you on screen all the elements. And if you have got a sort of one pager or something that isn't even in place yet for your video productions, then this is the video for you. And I would say watch this video and get this contract or something similar to this in place for your business, because it's just going to save you heartache if things go wrong, or if circumstances outside of your control, happen and you can't deliver the project for whatever reason. This contract is going to help you to make sure you don't lose any money and that you are all good with the client at the end of it all. So here it is. And while I take you through this, I'll sort of show you as well how to sell this to the client. So you're selling the price as well as getting them to sign the contract. And I always had a problem in the early days of getting them to sign the contract, but now I realize it's such an important element. And without a contract, my clients now look at me and think, well, we're just going to do this, and hope for the best, or where's the contract? So they're asking me now for the contract, and it works really, really well. So let's jump on over to the screen and I'll take you through it. So here we are on the screen, and I'm going to take you through section by section. And so this is a video production agreement, and mainly we're using this. Sometimes we'll change that title to photography, media, or some different title, but usually we're producing videos in what I'm doing. So the parties are basically yourself or your business and the client. So I just write here, this agreement is made as of the date of, and put the date, the month and the year, and client X being the client, and Pendula, my company, being the production company or the producer. And Pendula hereby agrees to produce and deliver to the client the production of the below referenced medias, which is called the production media deliverables, subject to and in accordance with all terms, conditions, and specifications set forth herein. The production company's responsibility for furnishing media are detailed in the below project summary. The associated costs of producing the media in line with the below scope is outlined in the fees section. So that just kind of gives you a snapshot and an overview of what this agreement is. And I just find it really good to put that in right off the bat. So then the project summary breaks down exactly what the project deliverables are. And usually that's to do with media or photography or some kind of digital product. So I list them in there. Now this is a product lifestyle film. This particular contract I've taken and adopted from one of the ones I did as a product lifestyle film for a developer client that I work with. And so this is basically saying it's a 2-minute video. It's going to be digital upload file with a full HD final film. And it's going to have sound design, which is a cinematic underscore, and it's going to have royalty-free licensing on that. And I think this was in perpetuity. And so sometimes I'll put that in depending on the licensing type, but this is royalty-free for life. So all good there. And then a 30 to 45 second clip as well, which was again, digital full HD download. So they could put it onto their website and stuff like that, again with the cinematic underscore. And yes, it was licensed as well. So the scope of this is basically a little bit of the project brief, or I think I draw this from the quote, and this comes from the brief and the quote that we put together. So this contract will be in place after the quote has gone out and kind of been approved in principle. Then before the final approval of quote and first payment of the deposit, then this contract goes out as a final sign off from the client. So I put that into my sales process that yes, there's a quote, yes, there's an approval on price, but also approval of this as well, which is really important. So this just says the scope is to shoot the lifestyle film to promote the client's premier property development and include concept mapping and mood and flow, storyboarding, and a detailed shot list. So we knew what we were doing when we were going into it. The shoot was to include a red cinematographer and a director of photography. So I was the director of photography. My friend Sam shot this one. And the editing was basically editing into the draft film, color grading the entire draft film, exporting and uploading the draft for review, then taking review changes and exporting a final film once all review changes were made. So the project fees for this particular one was total project fee $3,890 plus GST, and a contingency day fee, which I always list, is basically if anything goes wrong within 48 hours of the shoot that's outside of our control, then we call on this contingency day fee to make sure that we're not out of pocket or we don't lose out. Say the client pulls out, say there's rain delays or something isn't right with the property. When they reschedule, there's a fee, and that's included in this contingency day fee. So I put that in there to make sure they know what's happening. Then we ask for a deposit on the signing of this contract. So this is the final thing that happens before a deposit payment gets made. And that deposit for this one was half of that, 50% at $1,945. And then the final fee is due on the delivery of the media. And that was 50% as well for this particular project. Now I'll pause here and I'll explain this a little bit as well, because I think in the beginning when you're starting out, you probably should ask for 50% on contract signing and then 25% after the shoot. Now, the reason I say that is you then have 75% of the amount of money before you've even given them the edit. And in the beginning, sometimes you sell a creative idea or you think you've articulated it in a really good way, but the client doesn't see it that way. So it's super important in the beginning, in the early days, to make sure that you clearly communicate as best you can, communicate what you're wanting to create for them or what you think they need. But also, if something goes wrong and there's a misalignment of expectation, then you've invoiced 50% already. You've got the 25% after the shoot. So you've invoiced that directly after the shoot day, and you're only holding out on 25% before they see the project and they see the final edit. And so if there's any issues at that point, and it has happened to me before where there was issues at that point because the client's expectation differed from what I'd given them, then you can worry only about 25% still owing. You've already got 75%. So you can decide if the client's a little bit on the crazy side, then their expectation is, like a feature film and you're only doing a $4,000 video, then you can walk away and leave that 25% on the table, or you can say, no, look, I think I can manage to help them out more and to kind of get this to where they want this to be. So you can figure out then, but it's not going to be something that cripples your entire business. So I would say we do 50-50 now, but if you do 50, 25, and 25, that's going to be really good if you're starting out and you need to get that cash flow happening. So back to the contract here, the client shall have 3 opportunities to request edit changes prior to the final completion and delivery of materials. So we were really generous in this one. Now we only do 2, but in this case, I knew it was a very high expectation on this particular piece. So we gave them 3 options for deliverables. We gave them 3 options for media changes, and we actually, I think, did it in 2 in the end, but we added it there just for peace of mind for them. So the project start date is there as well, and the end date. So you give the expectation of how long you think it's going to take. Now, terms and conditions. So this is kind of the nitty gritty, and this is where you might have some questions from your client and whatever else that looks like. And so this is the bit which you really have to get the wording right, specific for your company. And we've had a lawyer to go over this, but also we worded it in a way that was really specific to our company. So whilst this is really good as a entry for you maybe into getting a contract or an agreement in place, and probably I would use the wording agreement because contract isn't necessarily what this is. Yes, you're signing it and everything like that, the client signs it, but it really is an agreement between you and your client that you're going to go about this job in a certain way. So it also helps them, and when I'm telling them about the reasons we have it in place, it also helps them and make sure that we are going to deliver on what we said we're going to do as well. We sign this as well, and there's a co-signature option on this as well. So anyway, let's go terms and conditions. So Pendula's standard terms and conditions are outlined below. It is vital that you, the client, take time to read through thoroughly and ensure to fully understand these terms and conditions and their implications before you commence any project with Pendula. Please also note that from time to time, we may need to alter these terms and conditions without notice. So please contact Pendula if you do not understand any of these terms and conditions in this document. So commencement of work, agreement to work with and payment of the deposit to Pendula constitutes agreement to these terms and conditions. Now, this is really important because say they don't sign it, but I've sent it to them and they pay a deposit. That means that they've agreed because this is attached with our quotes and with our invoicing. So literally if they pay that deposit, then they agree to this. So I don't need to hound them for their signature. Once we get the money, they've agreed. It's as good as agreed. So client agrees to pay 25% deposit of the project fees. Now this is different now. In this wording, it probably should be, say, 50%, but whatever you decide you want to take up at the beginning of the project, you put that in there. But let's say, on this case, I probably have 50 there, not 25, but that's okay. So the project fees outlined above, in order for Pendula to commence any pre-production, concept development, production, filming and or editing in line with the outlined deliverables in the project summary, with the balance payable upon delivery of client approved production media deliverables, unless other terms are negotiated between both parties prior to commencement of any work. So this is basically saying that we won't lift a finger except for quoting and maybe the brief that we've had to do or a pitch that we've made. We won't lift a finger until a deposit is paid. So whether it's 25% or 50%, we're just saying to the client, hey, until that deposit goes in, that's the kind of triggers the commencement of work, and that wakes us up from our sleep and gets us going on the job. So concept development, the client agrees to allow Pendula to showcase any pre-production concept ideas created in the course of developing the overall concepts as part of our own design and pre-production portfolio. So we want to basically be able to take any ideas that we forward to the client for these videos, and we want to have those as production things in our portfolio for pre-production. So we want to be able to have, like, show other clients those storyboards. If we're coming up with the concepts and we're showing the client those concepts and it hasn't happened in a collaborative approach, then those are still our intellectual property. So we want to hang on to those and be able to even resell those concepts to another client later on down the track. Pendula acknowledge the confidential nature of projects and agrees to only display project-specific work after the final agreed production has been publicly launched. So we're not going to display ideas before there's a public launch of the actual idea that we did for the client. And this is basically saying we want the ability to use that in our portfolio, and you can maintain the confidentiality. We won't do it until after whatever we've done for you is launched. So project fees, it's agreed that the project fees for services shall be the quotations provided via email unless work undertaken exceeds work as outlined. So if work undertaken exceeds the item specified in the quote, then the client agrees to pay appropriate additional fees for the excess work outside of the scope of the original agreement. Pendula agrees to notify the client of any increases in the scope of the project. So this is super important, that the project fees only relate to the brief and the scope of this particular project outlined in this agreement. And if there's anything in addition to that, we will notify the client. We agree that we will notify the client. We're not just going to keep on working and then at the end charge more because there's been extra things added or there's been changes or whatever it is. We're going to say, hey client, we're now in a position where we've really done all the deliverables, and every additional email that we're getting from you, which is asking for something else, is now an additional charge, and we'll outline what that charge is depending on what the request is. And so this has helped us a lot to just put brakes on things and say, hey, we're now at a point where even where I feel like the project is getting to a point where it's becoming too expensive for us to keep working on something, I'll say, hey, we're about to be at a point where this is no longer profitable for us. So we need to put the brakes on and we need to rethink how we're going to close this project out. So that's been a great addition, just to say that this work is, really only based on the project fees of this particular project. So Then excess work. So this is kind of another element to that. So from time to time, the client may require extra production work to be carried out during a project, or additional exports and uploads of approved medias to be provided after approval has been granted. So this is defined as rework and includes any work involving additions to the overall scope outlined in the project summary, or any additions or alterations to the production media deliverables, or any changes to the approved medias after sign off by an authorized representative of the client. The client will be informed as soon as any work is considered rework and falls outside of the scope of the original estimate. If the client wishes the rework to take place, they must agree in writing, which is an email is enough for that, and a fee of 120 plus GST is applicable per hour, will be payable for additional hours dedicated to rework. Now, I think we've got that now at $185. This is from a year ago or so, this contract. So I think now it's $185 for us for any rework. And we often will re-quote for rework. We won't do an hourly rate anymore. We'll sometimes just quote a new quote to get something done. So all additional costs will be added to the final invoice, payable upon delivery of production media deliverables. So essentially, if this happens in that last phase of the project where there's additions and you email and they agree to it, then that then adds on to the final invoice of the project. And sometimes there can be some debate around that. So you have to be really careful when a client agrees, yep, we're going to pay the additional fees that you want. You get to the end of the project and they say, no, we're not going to do it because we feel you didn't do X, Y, Z. So this is something where I've even quoted on something and quoted extra rework, waited for payment. I've asked for payment because I felt like the client is a bit wishy-washy. So I've said, no, once you pay that, then we'll complete the additional work. And so sometimes you just have to use your best judgment on that, because it can get to a point where you've done a lot of extra rework and the client says, no, we're not willing to pay. We feel like it was in the original scope. So you want to avoid that. And if you're feeling like the client might go down that road, you can just ask for the rework payment up front and then carry out the rework. And that works really good. So this is the last part of this line. There is publication and or release of work performed on behalf of the client by Pendula may not take place before cleared funds have been received. So this is super important because sometimes the client will want to release the work and the payment will come when it comes or when they get paid or whatever. And you got to say, no, this work is not yet paid for. You haven't, you're putting this online to your detriment because it's work that hasn't yet been paid for. So it's like they're using something that they haven't bought yet. And we want to try and avoid that. So we put this line in. And that's worked really well for us. And depending on how we run, if we're running multiple projects with clients, then there's payments coming in at all different times. So it's not as important. But when a client wants, a big TV ad or something like that to go live at a certain date, we want full payment before usually that date. And then they've got the incentive to pay for that before the project goes live. And I'll put a link below to this where you can grab a copy for a really small fee, just $1.99 on my website. And you can say thank you by purchasing it. And you don't have to write it all yourself. You can take this and reword it how you want for your agreements. So click the link below if you wanted to grab a copy of that. And yeah, thank you so much. If you do pick it up, it means a lot. Thank you so much. It means it's helped you in some way and you can give back a little bit to me just to say thank you for showing you all of this. So liability and litigation. This is an important one because we're dealing with digital media online. Okay. So it is agreed that all work and materials provided by the client for the client by Pendula will be free and clear of all liens and encumbrances and may be lawfully used by the client without infringing upon the rights of others, including and without limiting the generality of the foregoing any copyright, trade secret, patent, or trademark rights of any third party. Okay. It is agreed that Pendula indemnify and hold the client harmless from and against all claims for injury or death to persons or damage to the property, including costs of litigation and legal fees caused by, arising from, or incidental to the services to be performed during the performance of the work outlined. So this is basically saying that we come on site with our own insurances. It's basically saying we insure ourselves. We're not expecting the client to insure something that happens or something that goes wrong in the event of an accident on a shoot, that kind of thing. So this is the bit that's important though. Except any such claims which are caused by the negligence of the client or its employees. And it is agreed that we shall notify the client in writing of full details of any such claim. So where we're responsible on site for our own safety, then we take responsibility fully and we have insurance for that. But where the client does something stupid or silly, well, then that is a gray area. So we're just outlining that can be something. So this is important. You think about a bigger shoot or a big video production where you need to have these things in place so that your lawyer and your insurance can, protect you. If it's on you, then your insurance does. But if it's on somebody else and that, someone gets hurt in your team because the client does something else, then you need to make sure that this is outlined. And this was something our lawyers kind of helped us with putting together. So this part's really important too. Under no circumstances shall Pendula be liable to the client for an indirect or consequential loss suffered by the client relying on the production media deliverables prepared by Pendula, including, without limitation, loss of profit, loss of contracts, or pure economic loss. Any liability must be strictly limited to the direct losses associated with remedial costs of the production media deliverables only, not to include claims for delays, out of sequence working, non-productive overtime, award of costs, etc. Liability to any third party for any reason is specifically excluded unless separately agreed in writing. So what we're saying there is we produce the materials based on the agreed deliverables and the agreed expectations of the client and the job. And if they put that on the line and it flops, it's basically saying we can't be liable for that loss, because if a company doesn't have the right things in place already and we produce media for them, they don't maybe know how to get it out to the right channels. They don't know how to market it properly. Their whole system and their whole company isn't set up right and their company fails. Because of that, they can't come back to us and say it was because of the video you produced. So that's just covering us in that respect. So approval of final deliverables, the next section here. While Pendula takes all care to avoid errors, Pendula accepts no responsibility for typographical errors, spelling mistakes, or incorrect information on any product published. It is the client responsibility to proofread and approve all final copy before produced media is made public. The email verification of the client's representative shall be conclusive as to the approval of all production media deliverables prior to their release for publication. No refunds are given after a final approved production deliverable has been published due to the client's lack of attention to detail in the media review or approval process. So it's saying that even if there is a mistake on the final deliverables, that's down to the client's approval and that's on them. And there's been times when there's been a word or two wrong and we've just changed that after something's been released. So we haven't really gone after this, but this is a big one if there's a real issue. I don't know if you've seen the Netflix show about Pepsi where I think it's called I Want My Jet or something like that, where the guy sues Pepsi because they advertised that you could get a jet. And anyway, we came up with a concept, they approved it, and then they got sued for it afterwards. Well, the approval, it's on them. So not coming back to us. Force majeure. So Pendula shall not be liable for any failure or delay in supply or delivery of product services where such failure or delay is wholly or partly due to any cause or circumstances whatsoever outside the reasonable control of Pendula, including but not limited to war, natural disasters, strikes, lockouts, industrial disputes or unrest, government restrictions or transport delays, fire, power outages, failure attributable to hosting suppliers, breakdown of plant, theft, vandalism, riots, civil commotions, accidents of any kind, or an act of terrorism. Now, this is interesting because this was written prior to COVID. But transport delays and government restrictions, that's an interesting one. So, they pay us for a shoot and we can't get to the shoot because of COVID. Well, do we need to repay that deposit? In case of our agreement, we don't have to. And maybe we will, maybe we would, but this just gives us an opportunity for not needing to because of something that's outside of our control. And so that's really important. Now, copyright. This is also really important, and we're getting there. We're getting now close to the end. So stay with me. Copyright is Pendula retains full ownership and copyright of all concepts and any deliverables it produces. Now, this is interesting, right? Only once the production deliverables are approved and submitted and full payment in accordance with this agreement is received by Pendula do the agreed ownership and usage rights to the concept and deliverables transfer to the client. So what are we saying? We're saying that we are producing this, it's our product, and the client doesn't have ownership of it until they pay. It's like driving a car out of the dealership when you still owe half the money on the car. The dealer will not let you take that car until you have either a loan where the full money is in their account, or you've paid it in full yourself. So that's sort of what we're saying here. We own it until such time as they pay. So now this next section here, ownership and usage rights are determined per individual project and are outlined within the job description on the accepted quote. In accordance with the Australian Copyright Act, licensing of copyright is subject to a mutual agreement made between client and designer. Copyright will remain property of Pendula till such time an agreement is in place. So this is basically saying that there's an Australian Copyright Act that we're referring to here. So licensing of copyright is subject to the mutual agreement, which is this document. This is the agreement, you see. Without this agreement, yes, it can be verbal, but without anything on paper, you're really flying blind. So copyright will remain property of Pendula till such time as an agreement is in place. And this is that agreement. So Pendula reserve the right to use all concepts and produced medias developed in the course of the project, including those concepts not selected by the client. This is super important. And any and all revisions for the purpose of promoting Pendula in print or digital media portfolios, websites, social media, and blogs, except where the client has specifically requested in writing otherwise. Now, if the client says we really don't want you to show anything to do with this campaign, then that has a commercial weight and a commercial value attached to it. So if the client says, hey, you can't use any of this stuff that you've pre-produced for us or any of the concepts you've brought to us, and we might have spent 3 to 4 days working on each of those concepts to bring around this project, and we want to show other people, or we want to reuse those concepts because those concepts come from creative ideas that we have. It's our intellectual property. So in that case, we say, well, if you don't want us to use it, that's fine, but there's going to be a few $1,000s connected to that because we can't then on-sell that idea. We can't then enact with that intellectual property onto the next client or the next job. So we put a value commercially on that. And it hasn't really happened. Maybe it's happened once or twice where there's been a few $1,000s come onto the contract onto the price because the client was really particular about confidentiality around all the ideas that were fielded, and they felt that there was a collaborative process. It wasn't ideas that we as the producers were coming up with, but there was a collaboration involved. And we said, great, but if we can't use that in portfolios, then no one can see that work that we've done. So commercially it hinders us, and they agreed to pay an amount because of that. So this has helped us before, but generally it's not that necessary, but it's just good to have it as part of it. So unused concepts remain the property of Pendula. Pendula may still use paid-for concepts in its promotional material and in its online production portfolio, but unless the client requests otherwise, Pendula retains the right to display a small byline claiming design credit on works it produces for and on behalf of the client. So that is intellectual property to us. We're the video producer. We develop the concept. Therefore, we own that idea. And the client uses that idea, but we say, hey, we came up with this. And they are generally happy and obliged for that. So the granting of copyright from Pendula to the client, knowing that it's our works that they're paying for and we grant them copyright, does not extend to the use of design proposals and concepts submitted to but not approved as part of deliverables. Until final payment, Pendula retains ownership of all deliverables, and Pendula reserve the right to certain elements used to create your projects, including illustrations, raw files, fonts, patterns, stock images, stock video, textures, color palettes, and other non-exclusive items. Other than for the promotional use of Pendula, all services provided shall be for the exclusive use of the client's said purposes only. Deliverables may not be used for other promotional items, website or printed materials without permission, unless agreed prior. Upon payment of all invoices, reproduction rights for all approved final medias created by Pendula shall be as outlined in the project scope. For additional usage rights or future promotions, associated licensing costs can be assessed as needed. So that would be, like I said, if it went from being an online thing to a TV commercial. So Goodwill. This proposal assumes goodwill from both Pendula and the client regarding what can reasonably be achieved in any given time frame and making best use of resources to achieve the most effective outcomes. So that's basically saying that what we can reasonably do in a timeline, we will do. And we're basically not going to slack off. We're going to do the best work for the client and get it done. And then making the best use of the resources that the client provides to us to achieve the most effective outcome. Now, termination policy. This is really important if things just don't go correctly and don't go as planned. And it's happened once, I think, for us, but generally it doesn't happen. But if in the event that it does, this is really important. So from time to time, circumstances beyond the control of either party may result in the need for project cancellation. In the event of the client cancelling a project after a project has commenced, the advance payment deposit will be forfeited in lieu of compensation to Pendula, because we would have done some of the work already, right? So this is to cover the pre-production and the concept development time spent, resources purchased and allocated, research time and administrative costs. If the project is more than 50% completed, this is determined by Pendula and the client by negotiation. A pro rata payment is payable for time spent up until cancellation notice and at an hourly rate of 120. And I think now for us it's about 185 per hour plus GST. If a project is cancelled by Pendula due to unforeseen circumstances, the deposit will be refunded in full to the client in a timely manner. So we're taking responsibility. We're saying, hey, if something goes wrong on our side, we're going to just refund the money and walk away. So that's what I've agreed to do. And that really gives the client peace of mind. Now, you don't need to do that because you've already done some work. But generally speaking, I would do that just to be above reproach with every client. So in the event of cancellation of the project by the client, the ownership of all copyrights and original concept medias and any drafts or select images or video content and hard disks shall be returned and retained by Pendula. Now, this is really important because if they say, oh, we want to pay the extra 50%, but yet they keep some of the footage or they keep some of the ideas, and then they go to another person and they use those ideas or use that footage in another project. Well, generally speaking, that's not right. So that should come back to us as a company. And I think only once we've had to exercise this clause, and they didn't give it back. They actually stole the video. And we were in a position where we couldn't pursue that legally because we just didn't have enough money to do that. It was early on in our business and we lost out of, I think, about $4,000, but it didn't cripple us. And we just decided to let it go and move on. But now potentially we would be in a position where we'd pursue that legally and there'll be legal recourse based on this agreement and also common law as well, law within Australia for us to, recoup that money and get our IP back and get the video and the digital assets back from them. Okay, nearly there. Confidentiality. It is agreed that the employer or subcontractors of Pendula shall not at any time, either during the continuance of work outlined or thereafter, except in the course of their duties, divulge any of the confidential affairs of the client or any of its clients or associated companies to anyone whatsoever without the previous consent in writing of the client. Now that's super important because we're just saying we're going to keep everything tight-lipped and we're not going to divulge information about your business to anyone else. So that's really good and peace of mind for the client. Amendments to these terms and conditions. All and any amendments to the terms and conditions outlined in this submission must be provided in writing by the client and signed by an authorized representative of Pendula prior to commencement of work outlined in this submission. And a disclaimer: video production, illustration, branding, artwork, concept development, mood boarding, script writing, photography, and cinematography are all highly creative and subjective art forms. As such, Pendula take every possible care with professional advice offered and any suggested creative concepts and or their implementation. However, Pendula cannot be held responsible for variations between expectation and outcome. And that is it. That's the 5 pages. And that last one is really important because sometimes expectation and outcome doesn't line up. Sometimes a client will pay for a video and they're expecting a Hollywood blockbuster. Sometimes a client will have a really crazy idea. Even if you kind of bring it back to reality and map it all out for them, show them exactly what you're going to produce, they're still holding on to this idea of craziness in their head. And when you produce just, a lock, stock, and barrel kind of video, they kind of still misalign. So we do everything in our power to make sure that doesn't happen. But where it does happen, we aren't responsible for that because we're not miracle workers. We do great video work. We do exceptional work, I believe, in the market, but we're not miracle workers, and we're certainly not Hollywood producers. We're not running on $2 to $20 to $60 million budgets. So we can only do what we can only do. And that disclaimer at the end just helps us to manage client expectation. And if they're really off the wall with their ideas and we bring them back to sort of this is what we can do and they agree, well, then that's what we're going to produce. And if it's not going to meet their ultimate expectation, that doesn't matter. That's all part of the agreement. So hopefully that's helped. I know this was a long form video, but I wanted to put it out there. And as I said, I'll link this below and you can get a copy of it so you have it and you don't need to rewrite everything in it. It's just going to be a couple of Aussie dollars, just to say thank you for me for putting this together and putting this out. I originally put this out on my Patreon page ages ago when I had a Patreon page. And a lot of people got value from it there. And I thought, hey, I really need to get this out there for you guys to say thank you as well. And we're coming up to 10,000 subscribers on the channel. So I'm really excited about where it's going and where it's heading. And I'll be releasing more videos. So make sure to like and subscribe as well if you got value from this video. And thanks for watching. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.